member from Edmonton, Whitemud.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleagues in the legislature. It truly is an honor to rise to speak in response to the speech from the throne. And I want to, first of all, express my appreciation to the Lieutenant Governor for the grace and dignity that she exhibits in all of her activities, particularly in presiding over this legislature. And to you, Mr. Speaker, and to the Deputy Speaker, I offer my appreciation as well. The tenor of this House and the quality of the discourse is due to your influence. I know it's frustrating from time to time, but I certainly empathize and appreciate your activities. And I actually want to express appreciation to other members of the House, like my colleague from Leduc-Beaumont. I really do appreciate the cut and thrust of debate and sometimes interjections across the floor. I'm hoping that my interjections are received in the spirit in which they're given, which is with some humor and with an attempt to raise the quality of the debate. I also want to take this opportunity to thank very much the Premier of this province and the other senior members of our caucus. A year ago, there were 4 New Democrat members of this legislature. They certainly hit above their weight, or whatever the analogy is there. Some of you will recall that my first foray into provincial politics was as a candidate in the by-election in Edmonton-Whitemud in October of 2014. That was a very positive experience for me. It was made much more positive by the support from the 4 sitting members, and I really do appreciate it. One of them is in the House at this time. I learned a lot from going door to door with the Minister of Education. I learned how to actually listen to people, to appreciate a variety of opinions, and to validate those opinions. And I think that that's something that all of us should take to heart as we're dealing with our constituents. I had another experience which was very positive, but has left me with some nightmares. I was actually door knocking with the now Premier, and it was getting towards evening, and the Premier, in her inimicable way, decided that she actually knew how to door knock and didn't need somebody like me hanging around, so we could knock on twice as many doors. And so I went off with another constituency person and really did do a good night of door knocking. And then I realized that I'd lost her. I'd lost the Premier. And I wasn't sure where she was. And any of you that know Edmonton-Whitemud realize that we don't live with square on the square in Edmonton-Whitemud. There's cul-de-sacs and curved roads, and there's not a lot of lights out and about. So it took a while. And actually, what I was most concerned about actually was that her husband was back at the constituency office, and I was going to have to explain to him that I had misplaced his wife. Fortunately, she was smarter than me and actually tracked me down. But anyways, that was an interesting experience. And I had the now Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, as well as the Minister for Economic Development and Trade out helping me campaign. That was a very positive experience. I was taking on a formidable opponent in that election. Some of you may recall that the 3-term mayor of this city was was parachuted into that riding by the ex-premier of this province. I ran because I thought that was basically an insult to healthcare, which he was going to become the minister of, and probably an insult to the citizens of Edmonton-Whitemud. Edmonton-Whitemud was a very fertile ground for the New Democrats. And I actually was able to obtain the support of over 5,000 voters in Edmonton-Whitemud in the by-election. That was actually more votes than some of us in this House have obtained in a general election in their ridings. And I'm very appreciative to the citizens of Edmonton-Whitemud for their support. When it came to the general election last May, the results were actually turned right around. 57%, a majority of the voters in Edmonton-Whitemud voted for the New Democrat candidate. They voted for the vision, the compassion, the caring that our Premier has shown in that campaign. It was an easy campaign for me, a very easy campaign. Every day during that campaign, I was on the doors bringing to the citizens of Edmonton-Whitemud the positive message that this party, the New Democratic Party of Alberta, has. And it was well received. It was well received because a lot of my constituents are teachers, nurses, laboratory technicians, and fortunately for me, doctors, because the many doctors in Edmonton-Whitemud really appreciated the message that we were bringing. Bringing funding back to healthcare, bringing funding back to education, and not just public schools, the primary and secondary schools. We're bringing funding back to advanced education. So colleges, apprenticeships, the universities knew that they were going to have a supporter in the New Democratic Party. I want to turn back to my history as the history of developing my interest in politics. Let there be no doubt that I am a democratic socialist. Like the member from Edmonton, Ellerslie, I'm proud of that designation. I'm proud to say that I am a socialist. And dare say all of you are socialists. You all care about the welfare of man, the social justice, the rights of people. That's what we're here for. So I am proud to say I am a socialist. My socialist background actually comes from my heritage. Like the member for Sylvan Lake Innisfail, I'm guessing that he has a Scottish background from his dress today. And like the member for Strathmore Brooks, who admitted to having a Scottish grandmother that he wasn't following the precepts of, I'm proud to say that all of my grandmothers are Scottish, and all of them were socialists. My paternal ancestry goes back to the Highlands in Scotland. My ancestors immigrated from the Highlands to Ontario County in Ontario in about 1850. They were very successful farmers in that area, and then they immigrated to southwestern Manitoba in the late 19th century. My grandfather, Andrew Turner, whom I'm named after, was the Western Canadian plowing champion in about 1910. It's a real accomplishment that was done with horses, single-bladed plow. I have the trophy. It's one of my proudest possessions. My father was a child of the Depression, and I certainly gained appreciation for the nickel and the dollars through his influence. He had to leave school before he was completed because of the Depression, and he went on to work buying grain in an elevator, and then going to war and spending several years in overseas as a radar operator. Like other speakers here today, my father has been a massive influence on me, and I'm disappointed that he's not here for me to tell him. My mother's family, my mother's parents emigrated from Glasgow to Winnipeg in the early 1900s. My grandfather was a painter. My mother was a product of what was called in those days normal schools. Normal schools basically taught you education. She went out to a one-room schoolhouse in Pipestone, Manitoba, and had to break the ice in the water supply before the kids got to the school, that sort of thing. Tremendous influence. She died when I was 20 years old, but again was a tremendous influence on me. My political influence goes back to Grant MacEwan. Grant MacEwan was the Dean of Agriculture in Manitoba after the war in the early 50s, and he ran in Brandon Souris as a Liberal candidate. My father was a poll captain for him, and was very disappointed. My father was very disappointed when Grant MacEwan didn't win that election. It was actually a victory for Alberta, since Grant MacEwan moved to Calgary, became Dean of Agriculture here, and the namesake of our great university in this city. My experience from that, or hearing about that, really validated politics as a useful avocation. My first connection to a political figure actually was with John Diefenbaker. When I was about 12 years old, I received a copy of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms from John Diefenbaker for my school. And I would recommend that everybody in this legislature read that document, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And we've been talking about rights for workers that are essential services. We've been talking about rights for people that are transgendered. We've been talking about rights for individuals to access physician-assisted dying. When you go back in history, look at that document. John George Diefenbaker, the Prairie Renegade, was the designer and the writer of that document, and he needs a lot of credit. I don't give him enough credit to ever vote Conservative, but I do see him as a model for my involvement in politics. My next hero is Tommy Douglas, no doubt. I mean, everybody on this side of the House knows Tommy Douglas. But I have a different connection to Tommy Douglas. October 1970, a date that should go down in everybody's memory bank. October 1970, I was a medical student at McGill University, actually living not far from the Royal Victoria Hospital, which happened to be right next door to where the British Commissioner's office was, or not next door, but very close. And the British Commissioner was kidnapped, and we all know the story. What happened was that Pierre Trudeau invoked the War Measures Act. And the War Measures Act didn't need to be invoked, in my opinion. But the upshot of it was that several hundred people, like me, college students, just regular people walking around that area of the city, got put in jail. And they were kept in jail for several weeks without charges, without legal representation. It was an abomination. It should never have happened. And do you know the only person that stood up to Pierre Trudeau, the only person who said this was wrong, this should not have happened in this country which is democratic, was Tommy Douglas. And I can tell you that I have voted New Democrat ever since. Every election I have voted New Democrat. No doubt about it, because Tommy Douglas and the people that have followed him in the National Party, as well as our party here, Grant Notley when I first moved here, and all of the successive leaders, have had that same gumption, that same devotion to human rights, the same desire to make sure that all of us and all of our rights are protected. So I am definitely a democratic socialist as a result.